is easily probably since 2018 in the $1 billion range. And that's just the U.S. side of Counter UAS. So we're estimating that worldwide there's probably between $1.1 and $1.2 billion in the defense side being spent for Counter UAS funding.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 211. How is the Counter UAS market growing? For that question, we turn to Michael Blades, Research Director for Frost & Sullivan's Aerospace, Defense, and Security Business Unit. Frost & Sullivan is a business consulting firm involved in market research and analysis. Michael has been with Frost & Sullivan for nearly 8 years as a market analyst and growth consultant, and has earned a master's degree in Aerospace Operations as well as an MBA. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Michael talks about the growth and the trends shaping the Counter UAS industry today. But before we hear from Michael, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Now you have the option of making a one-time donation in any amount by going to droneradioshow.com/donate. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. And if you'd like to make a monthly contribution, you can still go to patreon.com/droneradioshow. So let's learn how the Counter UAS market is growing with Michael Blades of Frost & Sullivan. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Michael to introduce himself.
I'm Mike Blades. I'm a Vice President for Aerospace, Defense, and Security at Frost & Sullivan in the Americas region. Been with the company for over 7 years now after retiring from the military with about 21 years of flight experience in 3 different airframes. Just recently got promoted to Vice President and been sort of transitioning from all research to a sales. So it's a different kind of responsibility for me, but I'm still keeping up on my main areas of research, which is pretty much anything having to do with unmanned systems in the military, civil, and commercial area. And that's why I've kind of branched out into Counter UAS, because the proliferation of drones in all areas sort of increased the interest, made a relatively large expanding market of players in the Counter UAS space, both for military and commercial use.
Michael, so that we're all on the same page, when you say Counter UAS, what do you mean by that?
When I look at Counter UAS, I look at a system that can not only detect, but possibly mitigate or at least provide information or alerts that there's a drone in the area. And obviously that can be a system with one sensor. It can be a system with several sensors that are integrated together. And there's a lot of different iterations of what kind of systems are out there. So I basically separate them into 2 categories, and it's commercial and defense. And those are basically not based on the systems themselves, but based on the companies. So companies that are traditionally defense suppliers like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, we categorize them as defense systems. And then companies that are more suited to gear towards commercial operations like a Dedrone or a Aero Defense or Department 13, those kinds of companies that are not traditional defense suppliers, but are making systems that could be used for defense and commercial. That's sort of how we segment the different types. Then underneath those, we'll talk about the different kinds of systems within each of those areas, but just kind of broadly define them as defense and commercial for now.
Does it include both detection and destruction of drones?
Well, interestingly, this market has sort of made that determination itself. On the commercial side, because of regulatory requirements or hurdles, if you will, companies looking to sell into the commercial side, whether it's airports or prisons or any kind of structural, fixed site requirement for Counter UAS, it obviously has to have a detection portion first. And in a lot of cases, detection is really all you can do. So a lot of systems are focused on that detection. So on the commercial side, you see a lot of requirements. Hey, let's just be able to detect these things and we'll figure out what to do afterwards, because if we do that, then we're not violating any FAA rules or FCC rules, wiretapping laws, all kinds of different legal entanglements you can get into because of the fact that there's not a whole lot of laws that allow counter UAS types of systems to work other than a detection mode right now. But when you get on the defense side, we're obviously seeing a lot of requirements for not only detection, but mitigation. And the requirements additionally are looking more towards automated systems that do that. So automatic detection, automatic categorization of what the threat is. So that way you can say this drone is a threat, it's not a threat. And that way, when you get this information, it gets cataloged, but it doesn't necessarily provide an alert, because it doesn't matter if it's not seen as a hostile or some sort of threat. And then once there's identification of a possible threat, then even an automatic mitigation capability at the back end, whether that's a passive mitigation where it just breaks the control, the C2 link, so that the drone goes and lands right where it is, or it returns to home, depending on what the lost link procedure is programmed into it, or whether that's a kinetic mitigation and non-kinetic mitigation. And on the military side, especially if you're in an area of responsibility where there's actually some sort of war going on and you can do those kinds of things, they are obviously going to at some point require some sort of kinetic mitigation, whether that's with a sort of an artillery shell, loitering munition, which is basically another drone that's going to run into a drone, or even directed energy like lasers and microwaves.
You've done quite a bit of research into the counter UAS sector. What do you typically look at?
Well, I'm actually in the middle of it right now. And what I've done is sort of gone through from a start, because it's so transparent. I've gone through the military or the DoD budget and looked at all the contracts on the R&D and the procurement side for counter UAS. There's already a problem in that approach, because not everything that is labeled counter UAS, it doesn't tell the whole story of counter UAS, because there are systems that aren't strictly counter UAS that can do counter UAS. So there's counter RAM, so counter rocket artillery and mortar, and there's other radar systems that aren't specifically just for counter UAS that can still be utilized for that. So I've gone through and I've looked at the specific counter UAS spending, and then we also take that and sort of extrapolate it out through the years based on what the president's budget is saying, and then we also make an estimate. Obviously, the rest of the world spending is not as large. Usually, when you look at from a defense perspective, where most of the money is being spent right now, right? Because that's where you can spend a lot of money, because that's where the larger systems are coming from. You know, a defense counter UAS system is going to be in the millions of dollars, whereas the ones that focus on commercial are going to be, sub $1 million, more in the hundreds of thousands of dollars range, because airports and prisons and whatnot can't really afford those $1 million systems. So that's another sort of determinant between the defense and commercial side. But we've gone through and looked at least from a start, what the DoD spending is from a defense side, and then again extrapolated that out to the rest of the world. Even the rest of the world is going to be lagging by a year or two, and usually when it comes to defense programs, the entire rest of the world is about equal to what we spend, because we usually spend about 50% of the military spending annually on a global basis. From a counter UAS perspective, it would probably be less. So we're factoring that in, because most countries that you're going to use counter UAS are going to use them for fixed installation protection, and then also for a deployed location, so something that's mobile. So countries that are going to be deploying more are the ones that are going to be requiring more sorts of systems. So not every country deploys in support of some sort of contingency or a consortium to go together to protect certain areas, like what the U.S. and Europe and our allies are used to doing. If we spend 50% of the world's money or defense spending on counter UAS, then you can't really say 50% of that's going to be the rest of the world. It's going to be something a little bit less than that, because it's not equal parts. But we take all those kinds of things into consideration. And then what we've also done is we've looked at all the sales that we've seen. And obviously not all those are posted. They're not all in secondary sources, or they're not all in press releases. So there's been quite an interesting amount of spending that we've seen, and we can sort of put together a growth trajectory from what we've seen in sales. And it's been pretty significant since 2015, 2016 to last year, how much money has been set aside in not only the DoD budget, but also how much we've seen being spent with regards to contracts, both for defense and commercial.
Would you say that the rate of growth in the sector has been more linear or more geometric?
They've not been linear, because the last couple of years, there's been a significant increase in spending just because of the threat level that has been to the forefront from things going on over in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're seeing a lot of increases in using small UAS with small munitions that they've taken these off-the-shelf drones and taken a really small investment and caused quite a bit of damage. So you're seeing a lot of asymmetric warfare with the small UAS. So the need for the counter is growing, especially on the defense side. On the commercial side, I think it's a little bit overblown just because things like what happened in Gatwick and stuff. But the threat is there, and I think people are realizing that if we don't have it now, at some point in the future, we're going to have some sort of capability for at least detecting a threat, and then in the future possibly making sure that that threat is not an actual threat. That letting us know what's in the airspace, at least having some sort of airspace awareness. To answer the question full, the last few years has been the growth's not been incremental; it's been pretty logarithmic, but I think it's going to be more linear from here on out just because of the massive spending that we're seeing right now.
What kind of spending are we talking about?
If you look at spending from a DoD perspective and on things that were specifically labeled Counter UAS, but if you look at the 2020 President's budget, there was almost $1 billion set aside in the budget for Counter UAS. In 2019, that's supposed to be $550 million. In 2020, that's supposed to be $208. You see it going down there, but that's because it ramped up from 2018 to that $900 million, almost $1 billion mark. And so obviously that spending is going to flow through the next years because a lot of that's R&D. What it doesn't include there is what I talked about, the CRAM. There's also SHORAD, which is short range air defense, other ground-based radars that the Army and Marines and the ground forces are investing in, that like Gator that can do Counter UAS, but it's not specifically Counter UAS, and also doesn't include classified. So you can see that the spending there is easily probably since 2018 in the $1 billion range, and that's just the U.S. side of Counter UAS. So we're estimating that worldwide there's probably between $1.1 and $1.2 billion in the defense side being spent for Counter UAS funding, and probably that rate will continue on the defense side. The total side, what we've found from contracts, so obviously when you're doing R&D in the military side, it's not all addressable. A lot of that research and development is done in labs in the military, not necessarily to contractors. So what we've seen with regards to spending rather than funding on the total global Counter UAS sales, we had it under 100 million in 2016, increasing to over 200 million in 2017, and then over 700 million in 2018. So you can see on the spending side where that increase, over 3 times between 2017 and 2018. And again, there's several things that aren't included there. In 2018, Raytheon sold $191 million of Kerfus radars, KU, RFS. And, again, that's not Counter UAS only, but it can be used for Counter UAS. So that's not included. And also, again, nothing in the classified area, and again, it's only open source and what we can determine. So there's, this is probably the 80 to 90% solution.
From the research that you've completed so far, are you able to determine how well these systems work?
Well, no, that's the thing. If you look at the most recent press releases or most recent announcements, especially out of Europe and UK, they're just now doing another contest for Counter UAS systems. And I even put out on Twitter not too long ago, why are we putting out a contest for systems when there's over 200 systems that I know of that I keep track of in a database that are out there? Why aren't we having not competitions, but programs where we're testing these things to figure out which ones work and which ones don't? The U.S. has been doing that for quite a while. And even on the defense side, it's separately. The Marines are doing their own thing. The Army's doing their own thing. Air Force doing their own thing. And different companies have sort of attached themselves to different services where joint isn't really joint, unfortunately, because you see a lot of different spending and then it's all on different systems. But, the different services have different requirements. The Navy may have a more of a maritime look, so you might need a system where the sensors are hardened against maritime use. And there's different things that, each service needs. And Army and Marines obviously are going to need more of a mobile capability, more on-the-move capability. So you see a lot of spending on that. So that's sort of understandable. But for militaries now to have a contest for capabilities, I think all the capabilities are out there. We should be evaluating the systems that are out there and figuring out which ones are effective and which ones aren't, because it's going to consolidate the market somewhat from the multitude of players that we have now. There's over 200 systems, and when I say that, I'm including single sensor systems, I'm including multi-sensor systems, I'm including handheld systems, and also systems where it's drone on drone. So there's all those different kinds of systems out there, but many of them aren't going to fit the requirements of the military, and many of them aren't going to fit the requirements of the commercial. And, we sort of need to whittle those down.
Are any of the systems used in military conflict areas? where they might be exposed to a full range of threats?
Well, I know of a few systems that are TRL-9, technology rated in this level 9, so they've been basically deployed and tested and used in an operational environment. So I know Khaki system has been, the Blighter Light Eye system, AUDS has. There's a couple more I can't think of right now, but there's been several that have been used downrange in operational status. So yeah, there are systems, and there's a lot of testing going on still through programs in the military. Black Dart happens every year, the exercise for Counter UAS that they do annually. There's been a lot of systems tested there. MITRE Challenge was a while back. They had several systems tested there that some did well, some didn't. But yeah, there are systems that have been tested downrange, and there are systems in use here in the U.S. on the commercial side. So I know D-Drone has several systems in place. I know Aero Defense has several systems in place that are being used on a daily basis that integrate with the local security system that's already installed and whatever the fixed site is, if it's a prison or a business or whatever. So yeah, there are several systems out there and that are in use. Aronia, Germany they advertised that they've installed 350 systems in the last 2 years, 2017 and 2018. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and there's still a lot of companies competing against each other, and may the best system win. So there's a lot of that going on.
Can you talk about the value of the counter UAS sector compared to the overall drone industry? Is it a small percentage, or is it starting to become a dominant sector in itself?
I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to the UAS market. We're probably talking over the next several years being a several billion-dollar market, whereas the commercial drone market's going to be in the tens of billions. It also depends on how you look at it. I mean, it's sort of apples and oranges, because the counter drone market can include the drones, the sensors, the software, the services. So there's a lot to evaluate there, whereas counter UAS systems are a more limited use basis. Drones can be used for so many different things and so many different industries and verticals, whereas counter UAS is either you require them at a fixed site, you require them to be a mobile, so you can have sort of a counter UAS as a service, and then the on the move for the military. But I don't see it becoming anywhere near the market that the UAS market is.
What type of trends are you seeing in the market?
Again, I haven't gotten too far into it, but I have found a few things that are interesting with regards to trends. One interesting trend is there seems to be a growing interest in wearables. I guess it could filter down to law enforcement at some point, but right now it seems like the defense, especially U.S. defense, they want to have a system where you can put it on your vest or whatever as a ground troop and have some sort of capability, automatic capability, to be protected from small drones. So the wearable would have some sort of RF capability where it would detect the frequencies that a consumer drone will operate on that requires a C2 link. And then it would automatically mitigate that drone by automatically cut the C2 link and have it return to home. So there's a couple of interesting issues with that. If the return to home function is set so that it's sent to the spot where the target was, you can't really defend against that. The other thing is, how well do these things work? I've heard a couple of them work well. There's not a whole lot of them out there yet, but I see more of an interest in that. So that's kind of interesting, because that goes to also the trend of being more autonomous or more automatic, and automatic system that sort of operates without having a person have to monitor a piece of software that says, oh, here's a drone and here's an alert, so what do you want me to do with it? And you don't want to put more responsibility on an airman or a ground troop for them to do more work than they already do, or carry more stuff than they already carry. So the wearables are very interesting. I also see a lot of integration of AI into these systems, just kind of like with a regular UAS. But again, that's to enable that automation. So using artificial intelligence to help with detection and identification, and then also determining how to mitigate. Again, that's going to be more focused on the defense side. But
were you surprised by anything?
I don't know if it surprises me, but it was interesting to me. I've seen a lot of, or not a lot, but a few instances where it seems like those man-portable, like the handheld, like drone rifles, they're becoming less popular. Or at least on the defense side. I can see maybe there being interest on the law enforcement side, because I think a lot of the threats might be one drone, one threat, whereas in the military side, really the threat's going to be more of a swarm, possibly many drones at the same time. That's going to be your real determinant. If you can detect a bunch of drones, you can detect one and mitigate it. But from a defense side point of view, having this drone gun where you can mitigate one drone at a time, it's just becoming less popular because, first of all, you don't want to put more equipment on a ground troop, right? In fact, they're trying to reduce that. That's why they're looking at the robotics systems. You get less tired when you're walking or whatever. They don't want to put more stuff on. So who wants to carry around a drone gun when you really want a real gun to protect yourself? So I think those were kind of first on the market, and they're relatively inexpensive. So I think that was the first thing to use. But I think now that the counter drone systems themselves are the automatic systems where you don't have to sit there and hold a weapon and point it directly at a drone to mitigate it, those are becoming less popular. So those are a few things that I've seen.
Looking ahead, what sort of challenges do you see for the industry?
I think the challenge for the companies that are out there is to ensure that they get their systems in front of the people who are going to be using them. You may have a great system, but if you can't get it out there and demo to them, they're never going to know, and they're going to go with another company that's been more aggressive and shown that their systems will work. Of course, that could backfire because if your system doesn't work as good as some other system based on whatever requirements are out there, then you could be digging a hole for yourself. But you have to get out there and get in the mix because there's just too many competitors that are going to do it if you don't. So I think the challenge for the companies out there is to make sure they understand where the requirements are coming from. I think there's some niche markets out there. I know some companies are looking at niche markets where maybe it's a detection only, some focus on the commercial side where, you can do what you can do within the regulatory frameworks that we have now, or you can wait. If you wait, you might be left out of the competition. So, there's going to be a lot of consolidation. There's going to be a lot of companies that sort of drop their counter drone systems or remove themselves from the market. There's actually been a couple examples of that I've found where companies like, well, we're going to go into the counter drone market. Then they see all the other competition that's out there. Well, maybe we shouldn't do that. So I think there's going to be a lot more of that. There's a company that was called Drone Hunter in Germany, and I think was Drone to Drone. They've already stopped. Again, there'll be more of that.
Detection of UAS is all about the sensors. What does your research say about how companies that produce sensors are approaching this challenge?
If you have a one sensor system, you're either going to have to make sure that it's the best one out there, or you're going to have to make sure that it integrates with the other types of sensors that are out there. There are a lot of companies out there that realize, hey, we do this really well. Maybe we do RF really well. Maybe we do radar really well, but we want to be able to make sure that we can integrate our system into a multi-sensor system so we can, be part of the competition. You see a lot of that with radar companies. There's Rada and Echodyne and radar companies like that are actively engaging with partners to make sure that they can be a part of systems that offer that multi-sensor capability. Because again, more from a defense side, RF isn't going to be your only answer. RF really helps against the consumer drones. But if you have drones that are operating on a waypoint system where there's no continuous C2 link, then RF isn't going to get those. You're going to have radar or acoustic or some other capability to detect those drones. So, and then you also want to be able to integrate with EO/IR systems, so visible and infrared cameras, because at some point, especially on the defense side, you may want to understand what those drones are carrying and have a payload detection. So maybe the drone gets through, but you can see it on the EO/IR, and you see, well, the payload is just a camera, so it's not a threat. So being able to integrate your systems not only with other sensors, but to make sure that it works on an open architecture basis, so they can be controlled by a piece of software that runs the entire system. All those things are going to be paramount to succeeding in the industry and being able to compete with other manufacturers and other primes.
Is there anything that we missed that we should touch upon?
It's a very interesting market. It's a market that is basically risen from other markets. If it weren't for the proliferation of military drones on one side of the coin and small UAS from the advent of Part 107 and just the capabilities of small UAS from the perspective of Moore's Law and everything getting smaller and cheaper with regards to computerizing these things, we wouldn't have a counter UAS requirement because there wouldn't be all these drones flying around. And it's just going to get, I'm not going to say the skies are just getting crowded with them, but they're going to be increasingly full of drones because they can do so many things. So as we see the adoption of drone use increase, and we see, unfortunately, adversaries see the asymmetric value in using drones to perpetuate their goals, we're going to see an increased need for counter UAS.
And for my final question, Michael, what message would you like to leave in regard to the counter UAS market and its growth? As
drones become more popular and more adopted, obviously costs are going to come down. And as costs come down, the access that bad actors have to these things and the fact that they're computers and can be hacked or manipulated makes them that much more suitable towards what adversaries are looking for. And that's how can we inflict the most damage at the lowest cost? And drones will be an avenue for that. So as that becomes more of an issue, then also so will Counter UAS ways to figure that out. Now, there's no system out there that's going to detect everything. So finding the best system for countering as many threats as possible will be, paramount to the success of companies, I think, in this market, especially on the defense side, and especially as the rules become more clear.
That's it for episode 211 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Michael Blades of Frost & Sullivan and getting an update on the Counter UAS sector. I want to thank Michael for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about Frost & Sullivan or want to connect with Michael, check out the webpage at www.frost.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting a podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate or patreon.com/droneradioshow. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.